In all the vast tapestry of the Star Wars galaxy, few figures stand as tall in wisdom and mystery as Qui-Gon Jinn. This was a Jedi Master whose very existence challenged everything the Jedi Order thought they knew about the Force, about prophecy, and about their own rigid traditions. A man who could have sat on the Jedi Council but chose his own path instead. A mentor whose final act would set in motion the events that would forever change the galaxy. Most casual fans know Qui-Gon as the wise teacher who discovered Anakin Skywalker and died at the hands of Darth Maul. But the true story of Qui-Gon Jinn is far richer and more complex than that single moment of sacrifice. This is the tale of a Jedi who dared to listen to the living Force itself, who questioned authority when necessary, and who ultimately became the first Jedi in 1,000 years to unlock the secret of life after death. Our story begins around 80 years before the Battle of Yavin, on the galactic capital world of Coruscant. Like so many Force-sensitive children, Qui-Gon was brought to the Jedi Temple as a young boy, where he would spend his formative years learning the ways of the Ancient Order. But even from his earliest days, there were signs that this child would not follow the conventional path of a Jedi. When Qui-Gon was 12 years old, he was selected as a Padawan by one of the most respected and accomplished Jedi Masters of his generation, Dooku. Yes, the same Dooku who would later become Count Dooku, leader of the Separatist movement and a Sith Lord. But at this time, Dooku was considered one of the finest teachers in the Jedi Order, a master of both lightsaber combat and Force philosophy. The relationship between Dooku and his young Padawan was fascinating from the very beginning. During their first meeting, Dooku observed that Qui-Gon was frightened, and rather than dismiss this fear or encourage the boy to suppress it, he pressed his new apprentice to examine what exactly he was afraid of. What Qui-Gon discovered about himself in that moment would shape his entire philosophy as a Jedi. He admitted that he was not afraid of Dooku himself, but of failing to become a Jedi, of not being worthy, of a future that wasn't the one he wanted. In essence, he was afraid of himself and his own potential inadequacy. Most Padawans would have denied such fears or tried to hide them, but Qui-Gon's honesty and self-awareness impressed his new master greatly. Dooku praised him for his insight and intelligence, recognizing that this young boy possessed an unusual level of emotional maturity. This early interaction established a pattern that would define Qui-Gon's entire approach to the Force. While other Jedi sought to suppress emotion and attachment, Qui-Gon learned to acknowledge and examine his feelings, to understand them rather than simply push them away. This would later manifest in his philosophy of the living Force, but even as a child, he was already showing signs of a different approach to Jedi teachings. Dooku took his new Padawan on extensive tours of the Jedi Temple, showing him not just the practical spaces like training dojos and the archives, but also helping him understand the deeper mysteries of the Order. It was during one of these early tours that Qui-Gon first encountered the holocron of ancient Jedi prophecies, a moment that would prove prophetic itself. The young Padawan was drawn to this ancient artifact, asking his master about it with genuine curiosity. Dooku's reaction was telling. He looked at the holocron almost as if it were an enemy, explaining that it contained the prophecies of ancient Jedi mystics. He warned Qui-Gon that these mystics had sought undue knowledge of the future, which led them down dangerous paths toward the dark side. But even as Dooku warned against the dangers of prophecy, Qui-Gon couldn't shake his fascination with these ancient mysteries. This tension between curiosity about the future and the Jedi teaching to live in the present would become a defining characteristic of Qui-Gon's entire career. He would later become one of the few Jedi of his era to take prophecy seriously, ultimately recognizing Anakin Skywalker as the prophesied chosen one. Qui-Gon's training under Dooku was comprehensive and challenging. Just 4 months into his apprenticeship, he was taken to his first battle on the planet Shurupak, where he met Rael Averross, Dooku's former Padawan. Rael would become something of an older brother figure to Qui-Gon, offering guidance and support in ways that the more formal Dooku perhaps couldn't. It was Rael who encouraged Qui-Gon's interest in the prophecy holocron, revealing that Dooku himself had once been fascinated by it. This revelation confused Qui-Gon as it contradicted his master's warnings about the dangers of prophetic knowledge. Even at this early stage, we can see the seeds of Qui-Gon's later independence, his willingness to seek knowledge and form his own opinions rather than simply accepting received wisdom. One of the most significant missions of Qui-Gon's apprenticeship involved tracking down the notorious bounty hunter Shenda Mole. This mission would prove formative in several ways. When Mole captured Qui-Gon, Dooku saved his apprentice by striking down the bounty hunter with Force lightning. This use of what was traditionally considered a dark side power troubled Qui-Gon, though he initially confided his concerns only to Rael rather than confronting his master directly. This incident planted early seeds of doubt about the rigid distinctions between light and dark that the Jedi Order preached. If his respected master could use Force lightning to save a life, were the boundaries between light and dark as clear clear as the Council claimed. This question would continue to develop throughout Qui-Gon's life, eventually leading to his more nuanced understanding of the Force. During his trials on the planet Felucia around 60 years before the Battle of Yavin, Qui-Gon faced his greatest test as a young Jedi. He fell in love. The Jedi Code strictly forbade romantic attachments, viewing them as paths to the dark side through possessiveness and fear of loss. But Qui-Gon found himself in a physical and emotional relationship that challenged everything he had been taught about detachment. This was a crucial moment in his development. He could have left the Jedi Order to pursue love, as some Jedi had done before him. He could have hidden the relationship and lived a lie. Instead, he chose to remain loyal to the Jedi path while acknowledging the reality of his emotions. He kept a Mustafar fire diamond from this relationship as a memento, a small act of defiance against the Order's demand for complete emotional detachment. This experience taught Qui-Gon that it was possible to feel love without being consumed by it, to acknowledge attachment without being enslaved by it. This lesson would prove crucial in his later interactions with Anakin Skywalker, as he recognized that the boy's attachments, while potentially dangerous, were not inherently evil. As Qui-Gon grew in wisdom and power, he began to develop his own understanding of how the Force worked. While most Jedi focused on the cosmic Force, the eternal, unchanging aspect that connected all things across time and space, Qui-Gon became increasingly interested in what he termed the living Force. This was the immediate, present manifestation of the Force in all living things. His philosophy centered around the idea that the Force had a will of its own, and that the highest calling of a Jedi was to discern and follow that will, even when it conflicted with the decisions of the Jedi Council. This put him at odds with the more institutional approach favored by most of his contemporaries, who believed that the Council's collective wisdom should guide Jedi actions. Obi-Wan believed in the importance of careful planning and adherence to the Jedi Code. Their relationship was complicated from the beginning. Qui-Gon's teaching methods often frustrated his perfectionist Padawan. Despite Obi-Wan's clear proficiency with lightsaber techniques, Qui-Gon insisted on holding him back, forcing him to practice only basic forms. This was actually a sophisticated teaching strategy. Qui-Gon wanted Obi-Wan to develop his own distinct fighting style, based on perfect mastery of fundamentals rather than rushing into advanced techniques. But Qui-Gon's failure to clearly explain his philosophy hurt their relationship. Obi-Wan began to doubt his own abilities and his master's confidence in him. This communication problem would persist throughout their partnership, with Obi-Wan never quite understanding his master's unorthodox approach to Jedi training. The tensions in their relationship came to a head during a mission to the planet Pijal in 40 years before the Battle of Yavin. Just before this mission, the Jedi Council had offered Qui-Gon a seat among their ranks, recognizing his wisdom and abilities despite their reservations about his maverick nature. For any Orthodox Jedi, this would have been the ultimate honor, the pinnacle of achievement within the Order. But Qui-Gon was torn. Accepting the Council seat would mean passing Obi-Wan to another master, just when their relationship needed the most work. It would also mean abandoning his hands-on approach to Jedi service in favor of the administrative and political duties that came with Council membership. The offer forced him to confront what kind of Jedi he truly wanted to be. The mission to Pijal provided the perfect test of their partnership. The planet was in political turmoil, with a performance group called the Opposition staging increasingly violent protests against a treaty that would end the absolute monarchy and bring Pijal into the Republic. Qui-Gon's old friend Rael Averross had requested their help in protecting the young Crown Princess Fanry and ensuring the treaty's signing. As they investigated, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan discovered that the situation was far more complex than it appeared. The Opposition wasn't actually responsible for the violent attacks they were being blamed for. The treaty would give enormous power to the exploitative Zherka Corporation while providing little benefit to the Pijali people. Most shocking of all, Princess Fanry herself was behind the violent attacks, using them to justify rejecting the treaty and maintaining absolute power. This mission tested every aspect of Qui-Gon's philosophy. Here was a legitimate government asking for Jedi help, but that government was built on deception and oppression. The Republic wanted the treaty signed, but the treaty was fundamentally unjust. Following orders would mean supporting tyranny, but defying the Republic could destabilize the entire system. In the end, Qui-Gon chose to follow his conscience rather than his orders. He refused to act as a Republic representative and instead worked to save the innocent Zherka slaves who would have been killed in Fanry's power grab. It was a perfect example of his philosophy in action, listening to the Force's guidance rather than blindly following institutional authority. The success of this mission convinced Qui-Gon to decline the Council's offer. He realized that his calling was as a teacher and field operative, not as an administrator. Obi-Wan, seeing his master's commitment to their partnership, finally began to understand and appreciate Qui-Gon's unconventional methods. Their relationship was further tested during an extended mission to Mandalore, where they spent a year protecting Duchess Satine Kryze during a civil war. Living hand-to-mouth, never knowing what the next day would bring, master and apprentice were forced to rely completely on each other. This shared hardship finally forged the deep bond that had been missing from their relationship. During this mission, Qui-Gon became became aware that Obi-Wan was developing romantic feelings for Duchess Satine. Where a more orthodox Jedi Master might have immediately separated them or lectured about the dangers of attachment, Qui-Gon chose a different approach. He observed the situation carefully, trusting in Obi-Wan's fundamental commitment to the Jedi path while acknowledging the reality of human emotion. This understanding approach reflected Qui-Gon's own experience with love on Felucia. He knew that emotions couldn't simply be wished away, and that attempting to suppress them often made them more dangerous. By allowing Obi-Wan to work through his feelings rather than forcing him to deny them, Qui-Gon helped his apprentice develop a more mature and stable approach to attachment. As the Clone Wars approached, Qui-Gon continued to sense disturbances in the Force that others missed or dismissed. His intuitive approach to the Force made him unusually sensitive to the growing darkness that would soon engulf the galaxy. When Chancellor Valorum dispatched him and Obi-Wan to negotiate with the Trade Federation over their blockade of Naboo, Qui-Gon immediately sensed that something was wrong. The Trade Federation's leaders were too fearful for a simple trade dispute. Their reluctance to meet with the Jedi ambassadors suggested they were involved in something far more sinister than tax protests. When the Federation attempted to kill the Jedi with poison gas, Qui-Gon's suspicions were confirmed. This was no mere commercial disagreement. Escaping the Trade Federation ship and making their way to Naboo's surface, Qui-Gon encountered a clumsy Gungan named Jar Jar Binks. Most Jedi would have seen Binks as an impediment to their mission, but Qui-Gon recognized that the Force had brought them together for a purpose. This seemingly chance encounter would prove crucial to the success of their mission, as Binks provided them with access to the Gungan city and ultimately helped forge the alliance between Gungans and Naboo that would defeat the Trade Federation. This incident perfectly illustrated Qui-Gon's approach to the living Force. Where other Jedi saw coincidence, he saw the Force's will at work. Where others might have dismissed Jar Jar as a bumbling fool, Qui-Gon recognized that the Force often worked through the most unlikely instruments. But it was on the desert planet of Tatooine that Qui-Gon would encounter his greatest discovery and his ultimate destiny. Forced to land on the Outer Rim world to repair their damaged ship, the Jedi Master ventured into the settlement of Mos Espa, where he met a young slave boy working in Watto's junk shop. Anakin Skywalker was unlike any child Qui-Gon had ever encountered. Despite being only 9 years old, he could pilot a pod racer, a feat that required Force-enhanced reflexes that even most adult Jedi lacked. He had built his own protocol droid and was working on a racing pod racer, showing mechanical aptitude that bordered on genius. Most intriguingly, he claimed to have no father, having been conceived through some kind of miraculous virgin birth. Qui-Gon's scientific test of the boy's midi-chlorian count confirmed what he had already sensed through the Force. Anakin's potential was greater than any Force-sensitive being in recorded history, greater even than Grand Master Yoda himself. Combined with his unusual birth, this convinced Qui-Gon that he had found the chosen one of ancient Jedi prophecy. The prophecy spoke of a being who would bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. For 1,000 years, the Jedi had believed the Sith extinct, but Qui-Gon's encounter with Darth Maul on Tatooine proved that the ancient enemy had returned. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Just as the Sith revealed themselves, the prophesied chosen one appeared. This discovery put Qui-Gon in an impossible position. The Jedi Council was already skeptical of his tendency to follow prophecy rather than orthodox doctrine, presenting them with a boy who was too old to begin training, dangerously full of fear and anger, and whose potential threatened to upset the careful balance of the Jedi Order, would test their faith in his judgment to its limits. But Qui-Gon was convinced that this was the will of the Force. Everything about their mission, the detour to Tatooine, the encounter with Anakin, even the boy's incredible victory in the Boonta Eve Classic pod race, seemed guided by a power greater than mere chance. Despite the risks, he was determined to see Anakin trained as a Jedi. The Council's rejection of Anakin as too dangerous to train created a crisis that went to the heart of Qui-Gon's relationship with the Jedi Order. He had spent his entire career walking the line between respectful disagreement and outright defiance. But this was different. This wasn't about tactical decisions or mission parameters. This was about the fundamental nature of the Force itself. Qui-Gon's insistence that he would take Anakin as his apprentice, forcing Obi-Wan to take the Jedi trials and become a knight, was perhaps the most radical decision of his career. It meant abandoning his current Padawan before their relationship was fully mature, taking on a student the Council deemed dangerous, and betting everything on his interpretation of ancient prophecy. The return to Naboo for the final confrontation with the Trade Federation gave Qui-Gon little time to train Anakin or prepare him for the trials ahead. But he began teaching the boy about the Force during their journey, planting the seeds that he hoped would grow into wisdom and understanding under Obi-Wan's guidance. The Battle of Naboo marked the culmination of everything Qui-Gon had worked toward and believed in. The alliance between Naboo and the Gungans that he had helped forge through Jar Jar Binks created the perfect opportunity to strike at the Trade Federation's occupation force. The plan that emerged combined orthodox military strategy with the kind of creative thinking that Qui-Gon had always championed. But it was the confrontation with Darth Maul in the plasma refinery complex that would define Qui-Gon's legacy. Facing the Sith Lord alongside Obi-Wan, the two Jedi found themselves outmatched by Maul's speed, aggression, and mastery of the the dual-bladed lightsaber. The Sith's strategy of separating them through the complex's defensive shields left Qui-Gon to face the enemy alone. The final duel between Qui-Gon and Maul was a battle between two different philosophies of the Force. Maul represented the Sith way: power through passion, strength through anger, victory through domination. Qui-Gon embodied the Jedi ideal of balance, defense, and harmony with the Force's will. Both warriors were masters of their craft, but Maul's youth and fury eventually overcame Qui-Gon's wisdom and experience. As he lay dying, Qui-Gon used his final breaths to extract a promise from Obi-Wan. The young knight would train Anakin Skywalker as a Jedi. This dying wish was more than just the request of a beloved master. It was a sacred charge that would shape the rest of galactic history. With his last words, Qui-Gon reaffirmed his belief that Anakin was the chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. What Qui-Gon couldn't know as he became one with the Force was that his death had set in motion a series of events that would indeed bring balance to the Force, but not in the way anyone expected. His insistence on training Anakin, combined with his early death, created the exact conditions necessary for the boy's eventual fall to the dark side and his ultimate redemption. But Qui-Gon's story didn't end with his death. His years of study into the deeper mysteries of the Force had prepared him for something that hadn't been achieved in millennia: retaining his consciousness after death. During his travels, he had learned from the Force priestesses on the Wellspring World, beings who had discovered the secret of eternal life through perfect selflessness. Though his training was incomplete, preventing him from physically manifesting as other Force spirits would later learn to do, Qui-Gon was able to maintain his identity and communicate with the living through the Force. This breakthrough made him the first Jedi in over 1,000 years to achieve any form of life after death. His first attempt to guide events from beyond came during Anakin's massacre of the Tusken Raiders who had killed his mother. Feeling the boy's pain and rage through the Force, Qui-Gon called out to him, begging him to resist the pull of the dark side. But in his uncontrolled fury, Anakin ignored his former mentor's pleas, taking his first major step down the path that would lead to becoming Darth Vader. During the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon's spirit was able to manifest more clearly on Mortis, the mystical world where the Force was amplified. There, he appeared to both Obi-Wan and Anakin, warning them about the dangers they faced and reaffirming his belief that Anakin was indeed the chosen one. The beings of Mortis, the father, son, and daughter, also believed Anakin was the prophesied one, but sought to use his power for their own purposes. It was through Qui-Gon that Grand Master Yoda learned the secret of Force immortality during the waning days of the Clone Wars. Appearing to Yoda as a disembodied voice, Qui-Gon guided him through the trials necessary to prove worthy of this knowledge. The fact that the Force chose Qui-Gon to be Yoda's teacher in this most sacred art speaks to the depth of wisdom and understanding he had achieved. This training was crucial for the events that would follow. When the Jedi Order fell and the few survivors went into exile, Yoda and Obi-Wan would need the knowledge of Force immortality to continue guiding the galaxy toward balance. Without Qui-Gon's breakthrough, they would have been lost to death like all the other Jedi, unable to train Luke Skywalker in the ways of the Force. Qui-Gon's relationship with Obi-Wan continued even after death, though it took nearly a decade for his former Padawan to be emotionally ready to see him as a visible spirit rather than just hearing his voice. The guilt Obi-Wan felt over Anakin's fall created a barrier that prevented him from fully connecting with his master's spirit until he finally accepted that some things were beyond his control. When Qui-Gon finally appeared to Obi-Wan during his exile on Tatooine, their reunion was both joyful and poignant. The master who had always walked his own path could finally guide his former apprentice through the trials of exile and solitude that lay ahead. Their conversations during this period helped Obi-Wan maintain his sanity and purpose during the dark years of Imperial rule. Perhaps most importantly, Qui-Gon's posthumous guidance helped prepare Obi-Wan for his final sacrifice. When the time came for the old hermit to lay down his life so that Luke Skywalker could escape the Death Star, he did so knowing that death was not the end, but simply another phase of existence. The knowledge Qui-Gon had shared allowed both Obi-Wan and Yoda to continue guiding Luke even after their physical deaths. The true measure of Qui-Gon's impact can be seen in how his beliefs and teachings rippled through the generations. His insistence on training Anakin, despite the Council's objections, set in motion the events that would eventually destroy the Sith. His discovery of Force immortality provided the tools necessary for the Jedi to survive the Purge and guide the next generation. His philosophy of balance and listening to the Force's will ultimately triumphed over the rigid orthodoxy that had made the Jedi vulnerable to manipulation. Even Anakin's fall to the dark side served the greater purpose that Qui-Gon had sensed. As Darth Vader, Anakin became the instrument through which the Sith were destroyed, fulfilling his role as the chosen one in a way that none could have predicted. The balance he brought to the Force came not through maintaining the Jedi Order's dominance, but through the complete destruction and renewal of both Jedi and Sith. Qui-Gon's legacy is one of wisdom that transcended the limitations of his time. While other Jedi became trapped in dogma and politics, he never lost sight of the Force's true nature. His willingness to question authority, to follow his conscience rather than convention, and to see potential where others saw only danger, made him the perfect teacher for the galaxy's most important transition. In the end, Qui-Gon Jinn represents everything the Jedi Order could have been if they had remained true to their original purpose. He was a protector who chose peace over war, a teacher who trusted his students to find their own paths, and a mystic who never stopped learning about the deeper mysteries of the Force. His death was tragic, but his life and the principles he stood for ultimately saved the galaxy. The Maverick Master who defied the Council, discovered the Chosen One, and unlocked the secret of eternal life, stands as perhaps the most influential Jedi of his generation. Not because of the battles he won or the positions he held, but because he understood that the Force was not a tool to be wielded, but a living entity to be served. In serving it faithfully, he helped guide the galaxy through its darkest hour toward a new hope. This was Qui-Gon Jinn, Maverick, mentor, and master of the living Force. A Jedi whose greatest victory came not in life, but in the legacy he left behind, and whose wisdom echoes through the Force from a galaxy far, far away.